What if the woman they kicked out of the wedding turned out to be the bride? She didn't come in a limousine. She didn't wear diamonds or walk with an entourage. She came quietly, in a simple floral dress, hair in soft curls, skin glowing like sun-kissed mahogany. Autumn Rivera, 32. Artist, black. Beautiful, invisible. To those who decided she didn't look the part. They whispered, smirked, and stared as she stood at the edge of the celebration, alone. Then they told her to leave. But what none of them knew was this. The billionaire groom was waiting at the altar for her. Now sit back. Watch what happens when truth walks back into the room in heels, and every assumption begins to unravel. What was supposed to be the happiest day of someone else's life became the cruelest hour of hers. Autumn Rivera stood at the edge of the grand estate, dressed in a soft ivory dress that brushed the floor, her natural curls pinned half up, cascading down her back. There was nothing extravagant about her outfit. No diamonds, no designer labels, no polished entourage to announce her presence. Just a small hand-sewn clutch in her hand and quiet anticipation in her eyes. She took a breath and stepped forward onto the stone path, lined with white rose petals, leading toward the garden where the guests had begun to gather. It was a lavish scene, crystal chandeliers hanging from pergolas, champagne flutes sparkling on gold-trimmed trays, laughter floating above the cello's melancholy hum. She was early, perhaps too early, but she wanted a moment to take it all in. Her heart was full, her stomach fluttering. She wasn't nervous, just hopeful. Yet as soon as she crossed the threshold of the rose-lined entryway, the shift was instant. Heads turned, not with recognition, but confusion, disdain. A white woman in a tight blush dress whispered something into the ear of a man beside her, both turning to stare. Another pair of women, decked in pastel chiffon and pearls, tilted their heads like they'd just spotted a stain on an otherwise perfect carpet. Autumn walked forward anyway, the heels she rarely wore, clicking softly on the stone. A waiter brushed past her without offering a tray. A security guard near the edge of the lawn narrowed his eyes. She offered a polite smile. "Excuse me," she said softly to a middle-aged woman arranging gift boxes on a table. "I'm here for the ceremony." The woman blinked. "The catering entrance is around the back." Autumn's smile faltered. "I'm not with the staff. I'm here as a guest." The woman's eyebrows lifted. "Who invited you?" Before Autumn could answer, another voice sliced through the conversation. Sharp, authoritative. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." She turned and saw him. A man in a navy blazer with a gold security pin on his chest, standing stiff-backed, as though her mere presence was a violation of protocol. "Leave?" she echoed, stunned. "I'm supposed to be here." He didn't flinch. "And I'm supposed to make sure you're not somewhere you're not wanted." The words hit harder than she expected. Somewhere you're not wanted. Autumn opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. Another guest passed behind her, brushing against her shoulder as if to emphasize the unspoken rule. "People like you don't belong in places like this. Not unless you're serving drinks or clearing plates." As the security guard reached for his radio, Autumn finally spoke, voice low but steady. "I think there's been a mistake." He didn't look convinced. "I don't think so." A small crowd had begun to form, watching the scene unfold like a sideshow. No one stepped forward. No one asked questions. Just quiet nods, amused glances, murmured judgment. Autumn looked beyond them, toward the altar in the distance, The golden arch, the blooming vines, the delicate chairs arranged in perfect symmetry. And somewhere behind it all, the man she loved more than anything. He was here, and he was waiting for her. But they didn't know that yet. And that was their biggest mistake. Autumn's fingers tightened around the edge of her clutch as the security guard raised his radio. Somewhere between the insult and the sting, she found herself staring at her reflection in the silver tray carried by a passing server. Still the same face, same soft brown eyes, same serene poise her grandmother always told her was her quiet power. But in this crowd, among these manicured lawns and legacy names, she was suddenly invisible, or worse, a threat. She took a slow breath. "Can you please call Julian Blackwell?" she said. "He'll clear this up." The name didn't land the way she thought it might. The guard looked at her skeptically. "Julian Blackwell is the groom," he said, "and this is a private ceremony." "I know," Autumn replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm here for him." At that, a ripple went through the nearby guests. A woman with a velvet shawl raised her brow, whispering something to the man beside her. "She must be confused," he said aloud, not even trying to hide it. "Julian's marrying Veronica Aldridge. You think he invited a +1 from the janitorial staff?" Laughter followed, light and cruel, like glass, breaking in slow motion. Autumn stood taller, her expression unreadable, refusing to take the bait. But she didn't miss the sideways glances, the not-so-subtle scanning of her outfit. A simple cream dress, elegant but understated, without the designer label these people wore like armor. A younger woman, no older than 20, looked her up and down and scoffed. "Maybe she's one of those wedding crashers. You know, like from TikTok." Another woman, older, sharp as a knife in a blue silk sheath, stepped forward with a frozen smile. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice syrupy and thick with dismissal, "I think you've wandered into the wrong dream." The security guard nodded toward the exit. "You can leave now or be escorted." Autumn didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere." And then Veronica appeared. Gliding down the path like a swan, Veronica Aldridge was everything the tabloids worshipped. Blonde, polished, the daughter of old money, and a face made for magazine covers. The murmurs quieted as she arrived, trailing 2 bridesmaids in matching satin. Her gaze locked onto Autumn, like a heat-seeking missile. "Is there a problem?" she asked the guard. "She says she knows Julian," he explained. Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Knows him?" She let out a small laugh, like a joke too obvious to finish. "Well, darling, I'm marrying him in less than an hour. So whatever fantasy brought you here, I suggest you let it go." Autumn stared at her. She hadn't come for a confrontation, but the contempt in Veronica's voice hit like a slap. Still, she said nothing, just watched, still and dignified. Veronica, clearly enjoying the audience, took a step closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "He's not going to see you. He's not going to save you. This isn't a fairy tale. So take your discount shoes and your delusions and leave." Autumn blinked slowly. Her heart was pounding, but her face remained calm. "I'm not the one who's confused," she whispered. And with that, she turned and walked back toward the gates, leaving behind the stunned silence of those who thought they'd won. But no one noticed the man who had been watching from the balcony above. He saw everything, and he was about to change everything. Julian Blackwell stood frozen, one hand resting against the cool marble railing of the upper terrace, the other still holding a half-empty glass of champagne that had long since gone warm. He had come up here for a moment of quiet before the ceremony, to collect himself from the tidal wave of handshakes, congratulations, and superficial smiles. But what he saw below stopped his world. Autumn. Her walk was unmistakable, graceful, unbothered on the surface. But he knew her tells. The way her shoulders stiffened, the small curl of her fingers, the tightness in her jaw that meant she was holding back a storm. She had shown up. God, she had actually come. And they were throwing her out. From where he stood, he couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He saw the guard's posture, the way the crowd encircled her like a virus to be quarantined, the smug tilt of Veronica's chin as she confronted Autumn with that silk-gloved condescension she'd perfected since prep school. And he watched Autumn turn, quietly, without raising her voice, without a scene, and walk away. No, not like this. Julian set the glass down with a quiet clink that seemed to echo louder than it should. He moved fast, his Italian leather shoes silent on the polished tile. He ignored the questions from his groomsmen, ignored his mother calling after him, her tone sharp with suspicion, and descended the grand staircase like a man chasing the last breath of something real. Because Autumn wasn't supposed to be here. But God, he needed her to be. This wedding wasn't right. None of it was. And the way she had just been treated, by people wearing his name, on land he owned, it turned his stomach. He reached the path just as she was stepping through the garden archway, the last barrier between her and the road. Autumn, he called out. She stopped. The sound of her name in his voice still hit like it always did. Warm, low, with a kind of weight that made everything else fall away. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable, her posture calm. Julian. He was breathless when he reached her. Why didn't you wait? I tried, she said. Your people had other plans. He looked over her shoulder, at the cluster of guests still buzzing, at Veronica now frozen in place, eyes wide with dawning horror. You shouldn't have had to explain yourself, he said quietly. You should have been welcomed. I'm used to not being, she said softly. But today, it's different. Julian exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair. This whole thing's wrong. I should have called it off the minute they picked out the linen napkins without asking me. Autumn's eyes flickered with something close to amusement, but she stayed quiet. Julian took a step closer. Come back inside. I want them to see. I need them to see. She tilted her head. See what, Julian? He met her gaze, steady. The truth. And as the wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of violins from the ceremony tent, the two of them turned together, walking not away from the fire, but straight into it. The ceremony tent had gone still, the kind of stillness that feels like something holy, or something about to implode. Chairs creaked as guests twisted in place, watching the impossible unfold. Julian Blackwell, the golden boy of New York finance, walking back through the velvet-lined aisle, arm in arm, with the woman everyone had just watched being humiliated. His tuxedo was pristine, his face unreadable, but his body language screamed defiance. Autumn, beside him, walked with her chin lifted and shoulders back, a quiet storm in thrift store heels. The string quartet faltered, the melody unraveling like silk under tension. Veronica's mother, Evelyn Carlyle, rose first, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. Julian, what in God's name is this? He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he walked Autumn straight to the altar, pausing at the front, turning to face the stunned crowd, now choking on their own assumptions. Behind them, the minister blinked, clearly confused, shuffling his notes as if they might rewrite themselves. Then came the voice no one expected, Veronica's. "You've lost your mind," she said, stepping forward, her veil tossed back like a challenge, lips painted the color of fresh blood. "This isn't happening." Julian's reply was calm, razor-edged. "No, Veronica. What was happening? That wasn't real." Murmurs broke out like thunder. Evelyn gasped. A cousin dropped his champagne flute. Someone near the back whispered, "Is this a scene from a movie?" Veronica's face twisted into disbelief, then fury. "You're choosing her? That woman? She doesn't even belong here." Autumn said nothing. She didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Julian stepped forward, his voice carrying through the tent, like a match strike. "This woman," he said, "is the only reason I ever believed in love to begin with. And if any of you had bothered to look past your designer sunglasses and curated lives, you'd see it too." He turned to Autumn then, gently taking her hands. "I'm sorry I let them speak to you like that. I'm sorry I waited this long. But I won't waste another second pretending that this circus has anything to do with happiness." Silence. Heavy. Loaded. Evelyn sat down hard, as if her knees had finally given up the performance. Veronica didn't move. She was ice. Gorgeous, cold, melting fast under the glare of truth. Autumn finally spoke, her voice calm, but cutting. "I didn't come here to make a scene. I only wanted to see you one last time before you made a mistake you couldn't take back." Julian smiled then, soft and aching. "I already did, years ago, when I let you go." The minister coughed politely. "Should I still proceed?" Julian looked at him, then back at the guests. "Only if you're comfortable starting over." And just like that, without a grand announcement or dramatic crescendo, the entire trajectory of the wedding cracked open. Not canceled, not ruined, just rewritten, with the right woman at the center of it. As the stunned crowd sat motionless, too shocked to even whisper, Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. But not the one from the carefully selected velvet box Veronica's family had approved. This one was different. Small, simple, elegant. It shimmered in the soft light, not with opulence, but with memory. He turned to Autumn, holding it gently between his fingers. "I bought this 5 years ago," he said softly, just loud enough for those in the front rows to hear. "It was meant for you. I kept it all this time, even when I thought I'd never see you again. Even when I tried to convince myself I'd moved on." Autumn's breath caught, but she didn't speak. Her eyes, deep brown, trembling slightly, never left his. Around them, the tent was still frozen in place, every gaze locked on the ring, on the moment that didn't belong in a wedding like this. But suddenly, impossibly, made it feel real for the first time. "I didn't bring you here by accident," Julian continued. "This wasn't some impulsive mistake. I sent that invitation, hoping you'd come. And when I saw you walk in, when I saw the way they treated you, I knew I couldn't let this go on another second." From the back of the room, someone scoffed. "This is insane," a man muttered under his breath, earning a sharp elbow from his wife. No one dared speak louder than that. Julian's voice steadied. "This ring was never for status, never for show. It was always for the woman who challenged me, grounded me, and loved me when I had nothing. And I let her walk away because I thought I had to become someone else." Autumn swallowed hard, her hand trembling as he gently took it in his. "Julian, this isn't the place. You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not proving anything," he said, eyes shining. "I'm finally doing what I should have done years ago." Then, in a move that left every mouth agape, Julian dropped to one knee. Not as part of a grand gesture, not for the cameras or the society pages, but because it was the only posture honest enough for this moment. The crowd exhaled, a collective breath they didn't realize they were holding. Even Veronica, who had been statuesque and seething, now looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. "Autumn Marie Carter," Julian said, his voice reverent. "Will you marry me? Right here, right now. Not because we planned it, but because I can't imagine walking away from you again." Tears welled in her eyes, not from pressure or spectacle, but from the weight of a truth that had survived everything: class, time, silence. She nodded slowly, then whispered, "Yes." Applause didn't break out right away. There was only silence, a silence so thick it felt like glass. And then, unexpectedly, it came. A few hesitant claps, followed by more, until the tent filled with a strange, stunned ovation. Half of it was confusion, half awe. All of it is real. Behind them, the string quartet finally picked up their bows, unsure of what to play now that the script had been thrown out. The violinist took a breath and began a soft, unplanned rendition of "At Last." It wasn't perfect. It was better. And as Julian slid the ring onto Autumn's finger, the simple, beautiful ring that had waited half a decade, no one dared look away. Because somehow, in the most unexpected way, they were witnessing not a ruined wedding, but the beginning of something far more authentic. The aftermath was a slow motion, unraveling. As Autumn stood by Julian's side, her fingers still laced in his, the crowd that had once radiated certainty and superiority began to shift uncomfortably in their expensive shoes. The curated smiles and champagne flutes couldn't mask the undercurrent of confusion and indignation. Veronica's family, still seated in the front row, stared forward as if the entire scene might right itself if they simply refused to blink. A woman in a pale lavender hat whispered sharply to her husband, her words half hissed. She was the bride? That girl? He didn't answer. He was too busy watching Autumn, trying to reconcile the woman who had been shoved out an hour ago with the one now standing at the altar, wearing no gown, no jewelry, but carrying a presence that quieted the entire room. Autumn could feel it, the tension, the disapproval hanging in the air like fog. But she stood straight, chin lifted, refusing to let shame find its way into her chest. Julian leaned closer and kissed her hand. "They'll get over it," he murmured. "Or they won't. Either way, I'm done performing for people who wouldn't have seen you if you'd been covered in gold." At the side of the tent, the wedding planner stood frozen, headset in one hand, tablet in the other. She was watching the caterers, now unsure if they should bring out the dinner service. Should they serve the filet mignon to guests who didn't know whether they were at a wedding or a scandal? Meanwhile, Veronica had disappeared. Quietly, somewhere between applause and betrayal, she'd slipped out. Autumn didn't ask where she went. It didn't matter. What mattered was the man beside her, the one who had finally chosen truth over performance. But not everyone was ready to accept that. One of Julian's uncles, a large man with a face hardened by entitlement, stepped forward. "You've made your point, Julian," he said, voice low but tight. "Now end this. You've embarrassed everyone enough." Julian turned, his jaw tightening. "I didn't embarrass anyone. I exposed the problem. There's a difference." The uncle shook his head, nostrils flaring. "She doesn't belong here." Autumn's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe you don't," she said, her voice steady, her words not cruel, but honest in a way that cut deeper than anger. The uncle opened his mouth, but Julian raised a hand. "This is my wedding," he said, his voice loud enough to silence the room. "This woman is my wife, and if you don't respect her, you don't respect me." A hush fell once again, and slowly, as if recalibrating their moral compass, people began to move, some sitting back down, some walking out, and others simply lingering in quiet reckoning. The band resumed playing softly. The awkwardness didn't fade, but it morphed into something else: curiosity, unease, maybe even admiration. Autumn stepped away for a moment, breathing in the night air at the edge of the garden, needing space. A white-haired woman approached her quietly, her hands clasped. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I watched them push you out. I didn't say anything, and I should have. I was wrong." Autumn didn't offer forgiveness. She offered the truth. It wasn't your silence that hurt the most. It was the fact that no one was surprised. The woman nodded slowly, shame flickering in her eyes. "Thank you for saying yes anyway, for showing us what love looks like." Autumn turned back to the tent where Julian waited, his tux a little crooked now, hair windblown, eyes soft. She walked toward him, her heart steady. The worst had already happened. They had tried to erase her, but she had been the bride all along. And now, nothing would be the same. As the evening settled into a fragile rhythm, a low hum of whispers and sideways glances persisted like static under the soft clinking of glasses and half-hearted toasts. Autumn stood beside Julian as the first course was served. Her presence, still too much for some, not enough for others to comprehend. But she didn't shrink. She had endured the humiliation, the subtle shoves, the outright disbelief. Yet here she stood, not by accident, but by design. She belonged here, and more than that, she had been part of this world long before they knew her name. When Julian took the microphone to speak, all eyes turned to him. The tent fell still. "I want to thank everyone who chose to stay," he began, his voice firm but warm. "And I want to say this. Today wasn't a disruption. It was a correction." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared interrupt. He continued, "Many of you know me for my investments, my real estate, or my last name. What you don't know is that for the last year, I've been working on a project that changed everything for me. An art foundation built to support underrepresented artists. We launched it quietly last month with one centerpiece exhibit, a painting, untitled. But you know it, because it's the one you all saw when you walked into the reception." Gasps rose as heads turned toward the far side of the tent, where the grand canvas was displayed under soft golden light. It was breathtaking. A riot of color and emotion, a portrait of a woman in motion, neither smiling nor weeping, but suspended in that rare space between power and vulnerability. Julian took a step back and gestured toward the painting. "The artist," he said slowly, "is my wife." The silence cracked like thunder. Forks paused mid-air. Champagne was forgotten in flutes. Guests who had walked past the piece earlier, some murmuring that it felt too intense, others dismissing it as angrily raw, now looked at it with new eyes. Autumn stood still, every inch of her vibrating with the weight of the moment. "She painted it months before I proposed," Julian said, his voice softer now. "It's titled Becoming Seen. She never wanted her name on it. Not yet. But today, after everything she's endured, I want you to know who she is. Not just my bride. She is Camille Autumn Bennett, the woman who made this piece, the artist whose work sold for $4.2 million last week at Sotheby's. The woman many of you dismissed as an uninvited stranger. A woman at table 6 gasped audibly. A man in a tux nearly dropped his wine. Autumn didn't move. She let the truth hang in the air, heavy and bright like sun through stained glass. There it was. The third twist. The unknown bride was not just someone worthy of love, but someone they had celebrated without knowing, revered in anonymity, now revealed in full. Julian stepped away from the mic, walked back to her, and took her hand. Her fingers trembled, just slightly, but her gaze was clear. The eyes that had once scanned the garden nervously now looked forward with knowing. A woman approached them, one who had rolled her eyes earlier, who had whispered about ruining the aesthetic of the day. She now looked pale, almost reverent. I didn't know. I should have. Autumn cut in, her voice gentle but firm. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with kindness. That's the point. No one had an answer for that. At the far edge of the reception, one guest who had mocked her earlier leaned over to another and whispered, "How many people did we walk past in our lives who could have been extraordinary, if only we had looked deeper?" And somewhere near the band, someone began to clap. Slow, unsure. But then more joined, and then more, until the applause filled the tent. Not a celebration of success, but of reckoning. Of realized too late that dignity shouldn't be given only after credentials are revealed. Camille Autumn Bennett had come to a wedding. She had been the bride, the artist, the mirror. And now the guests had no choice but to look at themselves. The applause faded, but its echo lingered like smoke, thick, lingering, impossible to ignore. Guests stood in awkward clusters, unsure whether to return to their seats or offer apologies, unsure whether to celebrate or retreat. Some made timid approaches, offering backhanded compliments masked as contrition. "I always thought that painting had soul," one murmured, avoiding Autumn's eyes. "You have such unexpected talent," another said, as if that was supposed to be praise. Autumn smiled without smiling, accepting their words without internalizing them. She didn't need validation, not anymore. Julian stayed by her side, his touch light but present. His eyes tracked every movement in the crowd, protective and steady. But Autumn. She stood alone now, metaphorically and otherwise, stronger than any diamond in the showroom of their judgment. The veil of assumption had been lifted, and what remained was raw truth. Then came the ones who couldn't handle it. A couple. The same ones who had asked the staff to escort the woman out earlier. Quietly made their exit, their faces flushed, their pride in pieces. Another woman stormed past the tent's entrance muttering, "This whole thing's performative," her voice cracking with defensiveness. But Autumn didn't respond. She had no interest in revenge or rebuttal. Silence, after all, was its own kind of thunder. The staff, who had once looked past her, now hovered attentively, offering her drinks, adjusting flower arrangements near her seat, seeking small acts of penance. Julian's cousin, Michael, who had once laughed under his breath when Autumn was pushed aside at the welcome table, now approached her with red in his cheeks. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "I judged you, without ever looking at you." Autumn tilted her head, measured him with calm eyes, then nodded once. "Apology accepted. Just remember it the next time you see someone like me, and think they're less." The words weren't sharp, but they landed like a blade wrapped in velvet. Not far away, the wedding planner, previously flustered and dismissive, stood frozen, reviewing the guest list as if it might explain why she hadn't seen Camille's name, why she hadn't recognized the bride. But it wasn't the list that failed. It was her lens. Then came the media call. A guest, perhaps trying to reclaim relevance or simply unburden their guilt, had leaked the story. Billionaire's bride mistaken for staff and kicked out by guests. The headline began to race through social platforms like a spark in dry grass. A few attendees panicked, already emailing PR firms. Others braced for backlash, imagining themselves in the viral footage. But Autumn didn't flinch. She had nothing to hide. Later that night, under softer light and quieter music, Julian wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close as the dance floor cleared. He leaned into her ear, his voice just above a whisper. "Do you regret anything?" She turned to face him, her smile tired, but resolute. "Only that it took humiliation for people to see me." Julian exhaled through his nose, ashamed not of her, but of them, of everyone who had made her earn the respect she should have been given freely. "They'll learn," he said. "Maybe." Autumn brushed her fingers across his jaw. "But I didn't do this to teach them. I did it to remind myself I never needed their approval." And then they danced, not as an apology, not as a show, but as a reclamation. The bride and her groom, the artist and her witness. The woman who walked in alone and walked out was unforgettable. Around them, the guests watched in silence. For once, they weren't looking at the wealth or the labels or the guest list. They were looking at a woman who had shown them something they didn't expect to find at a wedding. Grace, sharpened by truth, wrapped in a frame of power they could no longer deny. When Autumn Rivera stepped back into the garden, the hum of chatter died, as if someone had pressed mute on the world. The guests who had moments ago been laughing over wine and privilege now turned, eyes wide, breath caught. She walked without rush, without apology. Her ivory satin dress moving like water over stone, her spine straight, her gaze unwavering. No veil, no diamonds, no entourage, just her presence, raw and undeniable. They had kicked her out thinking she was a mistake. Now, she was a mirror. Julian Blackwell stood waiting at the altar, his tailored suit pristine, but it was his eyes that told the real story, softened with love, sharpened by fury. As Autumn approached, he stepped forward, not bothering to hide the emotion surging beneath his calm exterior. He reached for her hands, kissed them as if sealing something sacred, then turned to the crowd, not with a toast, but a reckoning. "This," he said, voice ringing with quiet power, "is Autumn Rivera, my fiancée, the love of my life, and the woman many of you decided didn't belong here, simply because of how she looked, or what she wore, or who you assumed she was." The weight of his words hung heavy. A man in a navy blazer shifted in his seat. A blonde woman clutched her champagne flute a little tighter. No one spoke. No one dared. Julian's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. If you felt uncomfortable because she didn't fit your expectations, then perhaps your expectations are the problem. Autumn didn't look around for validation. She didn't need it. Her voice, when she spoke, was softer than Julian's, but it struck just as deep. "You can't shame someone out of their own story. I didn't crash this wedding. I wrote it." A flicker of something, pride, maybe awe, moved through the crowd. Not all were ready to change, but many would remember this moment. And those who had laughed, judged, whispered, now sat frozen in their silence, their discomfort finally visible. Julian turned back to Autumn, and everything else melted away. "Let's begin, again," he said. Autumn nodded, her lips trembling not from fear, but from the sheer weight of reclaiming what was always hers. They stepped forward together, two people in love, unstoppable and unafraid. And this time, no one moved to stop them. The music swelled. But it wasn't just the beginning of a wedding. It was the beginning of a new truth. And for the first time that day, the guests stood, not because they were told to, but because they knew they were witnessing something real. Autumn Rivera wasn't just the bride. She was the lesson. The sun dipped low, casting golden threads across the garden as the ceremony moved toward its crescendo. Vows had been exchanged, Julian's filled with unshakable devotion, steady as the hands that held hers. The crowd, once full of hushed gossip and sideways glances, now sat silent, watching Autumn Rivera with a kind of reverence they hadn't earned. And then she surprised everyone. She didn't hand her vows to the officiant. She stepped forward. She didn't just marry a man. She claimed a space. Her voice, calm but resolute, carried across the hush. I've spent much of my life walking into rooms that were never designed with me in mind. Rooms where I was expected to shrink, smile politely, be small. I did that. For years I did that. But I won't anymore. Not today. A ripple moved through the crowd, like wind through tall grass. She turned slightly, looking not just at Julian, but at everyone. I vow to love you with the strength of a woman who has survived being overlooked. I vow to fight beside you, not behind you. But there's something else I have to say. Not just to you, to the world that thought it could push me out of my own story. Julian's fingers tightened gently around hers. She breathed once, deep and clean. I will never hide who I am to fit into a world that's not ready for me, and I will never again stand silent when dignity is denied. Because belonging is not a gift you wait to be given. It's a truth you carry, and I carry mine, with pride. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words landed heavy, then lit a spark. Somewhere, someone gasped. Someone else wiped a tear. The wind picked up, not cold, but charged, as if nature itself had taken notice. Then Julian smiled, eyes full. You are magnificent. And with that, he leaned in. Their kiss wasn't theatrical. It was raw and beautiful and defiant. Not just a seal of love, but a reclaiming of space, of truth, of identity. When they broke apart, applause erupted, not tentative, not polite, but real, the kind that vibrated through bone. And then the music began. Autumn didn't wait to be asked. She didn't look for permission. She stepped into the center of the dance floor and extended her hand. Not to Julian first, but to the moment itself. Her chin lifted, her back straight. She didn't dance like a bride who'd just won approval. She danced like a queen who'd never needed it. As Julian joined her, and they moved in sync beneath the soft glow of twilight, guests watched, not just a love story, but a revolution in a dress. One that whispered, "This is who I am, and I am not going anywhere." And long after the music faded, long after the last glass of champagne was emptied, people would remember the woman who was nearly turned away, and danced anyway. The music had stopped. The champagne flutes were half full, but the air had never felt more electric. Autumn Rivera, once dismissed as the help, as a mistake, as out of place, was now glowing at the center of the floor, leading the first dance with the man who loved her, not despite her identity, but because of it. Guests who had mocked her earlier now stared in stunned silence as she moved with elegance, strength, and unmistakable power. But the real moment didn't happen on the dance floor. It came when a white woman from earlier, the one who called security, tried to approach her with a polite smile and trembling apology. Autumn didn't lash out. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "You don't owe me kindness now. You owed it when you thought I was nobody." Then she turned, took Julian's hand, and walked out into the night. Some watched in shame, some in awe, all in silence. Because that's what happens when a woman who was once erased writes herself back into history with grace sharper than any blade. And somewhere deep inside, every person watching asked themselves, would I have treated her differently? That is the kind of ending that doesn't fade when the credits roll. That is the story that stays with you.